Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today as we discuss light and birds, specifically in our region of St. Louis, Missouri. This presentation was made possible through the collaboration of the following organizations. Today, we will be hearing from local experts in our region. I'd like to introduce myself, Emily Connor. I'm an educator at the Audubon Center at Riverlands. I'd also like to introduce my coworker who will also be speaking today, Tara Holman. She is the Conservation Science Associate at the Audubon Center at Riverlands. We will also be hearing from Don Ficken. He is the president of the International Dark Sky Association Missouri chapter, as well as Jean Favara, the Vice President of Conservation with St. Louis Audubon Society. Throughout this presentation, we will discuss the significance of the Mississippi Flyway, bird migration patterns, and the impact light pollution has on these birds. We believe that by reducing the effects of light pollution, we are helping both birds and people. It is our hope that with this presentation, we will spark ideas on how you can help mitigate the impacts light pollution have on birds in your community. With that, I'll turn it over to Tara Holman.
Thanks, Emily. So the Mississippi Flyway is one of 4 great migratory flyways in North America. It's the largest pathway used by birds, and this flyway ranges all the way from Manitoba and Ontario up in Canada, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. While most other migratory flyways are obstructed by mountain ranges or oceans, this unobstructed flyway is used by about 60% of North American songbirds and 40% of North American waterfowl. That encompasses over 325 different bird species out of the 900 species that can be found in the US. One of the Mississippi Flyway's greatest resources is the Mississippi and Missouri rivers and their confluence. Migratory birds use these waterways as a sort of roadmap to follow as they migrate north and south to their breeding and wintering grounds. These rivers also provide them the ample resources they need while they're migrating. So 14 of our 50 states encompass the Mississippi Flyway, shown here in green. And to the right of it, we can see the Atlantic Flyway, shown in that pink color. And to the left, we have the Central Flyway, shown in purple, and the Pacific Flyway, shown in blue. So birds that use these flyways can usually be designated into one of them being long-distance migrants, like our Baltimore Orioles. So these birds breed in Missouri and in the surrounding areas. And they'll use the Mississippi Flyway to migrate all the way down to South and Central America during the winter. Comparatively, we have a raptor like the osprey that we would consider a short-distance migrant. So while it breeds here in Missouri and the surrounding areas, it'll only migrate down pretty much to the Gulf Coast to winter. So most of our birds migrate at night to their wintering or breeding grounds. So you can see in the graphics here to the right that the Mississippi Flyway has the highest migration activity in the spring and one of the highest in the fall. However, light pollution given off by urban centers and residential hubs can disorient birds as they move from their breeding or wintering grounds and vice versa. This usually ends up with birds being either overexhausted or end up colliding with buildings. Currently, St. Louis is the 5th most dangerous city for spring migrants and the 6th most dangerous city for fall migrants.
This is Jean Favara, Vice President of Conservation for St. Louis Audubon Society. So you may ask, what is St. Louis doing about these problems that birds are having as they migrate both north and south over our area? St. Louis Audubon Society has just recently formed a new project called Bird Safe St. Louis, or STL. The goal of this project is to establish a long-term community relationships that support bird-safe practices and reduce bird fatalities due to light pollution and window collisions. And we just started this project in the fall and winter of 2019. And we're building this project on earlier efforts. One was put forth by St. Louis Chamber of Arts Council's Silent Skies Lights Out project, and some very early work in 2000 to 2003 by St. Louis Audubon Society when they did avian mortality surveys within those years. And out of that work, in 2001, the Gateway Arch spotlights were turned off now for 2 weeks during the spring and fall migrations, and this helps protect birds as they move over the St. Louis region. And we look forward to starting our avian mortality surveys with the 2020 fall migration period. Next slide.
So this is Don Ficken with I'm part of the Missouri chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. It's certainly a pleasure to be part of this group. Many of you may not be aware of the International Dark Sky Association. It's a global organization that's really working or tackling light pollution across the world. They have 65 chapters. We're in something like 28 countries. What's sad, you might say, is that the light pollution is increasing at something like 2.2% per year annually. And that's, if you start compounding that, that's a very significant number. So it's something that we all should be concerned about. And that means that basically 80% right now of the world is impacted in some way by light pollution, and a third of mankind cannot even see the Milky Way. So today our focus is on birds, of course, but if you think about this even further, insects are impacted by light pollution. In fact, 2/3 of the world's animal protein comes from insects, and so it's something that we all should be concerned about from a bird point of view. In fact, something like at least 30% of vertebrates are nocturnal and 60% of invertebrates are nocturnal. So there's a lot of implications from a pure health ecosystem from a bird point of view. So IDA Missouri was formed, if you can go to the next slide, please. IDA Missouri was formed in 2018. It's a fairly new chapter. We just had our first birthday. We've divided our chapter up into zones, and we've been very active. We've been building expertise in biology and parks and tourism and astronomy, and we've got a lot of active projects underway. Next slide, please. So the really basic question is, why do we even light? Of course, there's a lot of really good reasons, and most people, frankly, don't even think about why we light. There's a lot of good reasons. For example, we want to be safe. We want bright lights to make sure that we're safe around our home or where we're shopping or whatever else. And also, obviously, to complete tasks. But the truth is, I think a lot of people people in general like light. It's something that makes them feel better. In fact, we rely very heavily on our eyes. About 50% of our cortex, the surface of our brain, is dedicated to vision. And I think if you go back maybe a long time ago, it's really going back to the days where dark made us scared, made us afraid. And so we sometimes overcompensate with adding more light to feel better. Next slide. So the question is, what can we do? There's something called the 4 Ps. And what that means is how that you deploy light. You have to put it in the proper place, the proper amount, the proper time, and the proper spectrum. You do all those things, and it really starts making a big difference in the amount of light pollution. Next, please. So let's take a look at this chart. This is an interesting chart. You see the red line where it divides what's called the useful light from the wasted light. This is a very typical kind of thing. You'll start noticing this if you start looking around, that you'll see a street light and it'll be simply pointing light up into the sky. And that's really wasted light at the end of the day. If you look on the right, there's a way to shield the light and prohibit that light from going up in the air. One of our scientists on our board actually did a little calculation. He said, if you take all that wasted light just for street lights above that red line right there, we could probably fund the national park system, several $1 billion. So it's really pointless to put your light into the sky like that. Next slide. With today's technology, it's really moving quickly. We have a lot of great things like timers and dimmers and photocells. The question is making sure that you put just the amount of light that you actually need, and only when you need it. A good example is if you have a ball field, for example, you don't need to have every light on to simply chalk it. You don't need to have necessarily the light on all night or outside your garage, maybe just when a car pulls up, whatever else. The technology is really getting very good, and it's one of the ways that you can actually help with light pollution. Next slide. So this is a rather interesting chart where we have sunlight. It's a spectrum, basically, of light. We're familiar with that. And if you can see on the left-hand side, you got the blue light, which is the shorter wavelengths, on the right-hand side, the longer. So the sunlight would be the baseline spectrum. And you can see as you go down the different types of light, if you go ahead and advance that just a little, there you go. The white light emitting diodes called the LEDs are the very popular choice right now. And frankly, they're very good. They're very, they do a lot of great savings as far as cost. They're very precise. They last a lot longer. The trick is that we have to get the right kind of spectrum to be able to make sure that we don't get into something that impacts insects and animals and so forth. Next slide, please. So this is an example right here. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see we started with what's called Kelvin, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Kelvin. And we have a red line, and then we go all the way up to 10,000 Kelvin. So what's happening a lot of times is folks are buying these bulbs, and they think, wow, I'm saving 70% of my costs as far as operating costs. I'll just buy something brighter. So maybe before it might have been a 2,000 Kelvin equivalent. They're going up to 5,000 and 6,000, and that starts getting into impact on wildlife. Next slide, please. So here's an example. If you're trying to figure out what am I buying, just go look at the box of whatever you're buying. And this is very, sometimes you have to look for it, but this is a very typical kind of thing right here. You'll see right, maybe I think you can advance that just a little bit. There you go. Right there, you'll see that it has a warm spectrum and then a cool spectrum on the right. So in this case, it's a 2700K. That means it's below 3,000 Kelvin, which is really good. And you can see the little chart on the left-hand side of how 10,000 is basically a very bright sky, and then how the 1 and 2,000. And frankly, going back in time, we had candlelight, and it was well below the 3,000 Kelvin. Next slide, please. If you go to, let's say, a shopping, like a hardware store, like a Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever your choice is, you'll often find what's called IDA approved, dark sky approved lights. And you can see on the right-hand side that they're shielded down, and it's something that if you do that shielding, it makes a big difference on your ability to actually see something. Next slide. So the important thing, I think, is that we are often buying to save money, to put LED lights in. That's really great. There's nothing wrong with saving money. It's a very smart thing. But it isn't just about saving money. You have to look at everything, the spectrum, the amount of lights you're putting down, and make sure you have a good purpose for that light. Next, please. And importantly, at least at IDA, what I found is that people come to us for two reasons often. One is because they have some kind of auto dealership coming next to them, bright lights, they're very concerned about that, or their neighbor is simply putting lights in their window. And I suggest that you, if you put your lights out there properly, that you'll have maybe better relations with your neighbors. No one wants a light in their window at night. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Don. We want to thank everybody for joining us today on behalf of the Audubon Center at Riverlands, St. Louis Audubon Society, and IDA Missouri. As you look on the slide here, you can find, if you'd like to contact any of our presenters today, you can find that information on our resource slide, as well as some additional resources if you'd like to learn more about the International Dark Sky Week, which happens to be this week, and other additional information. So once again, we really want to thank you guys for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation.